Hello everyone, welcome to the Ekomende, and today we're going to talk about what led to the Rwandan genocide. And this is going to be part one of the Kivu conflict, where eventually we're going to get to the modern war that's going on between the M23 rebellion and the DRC. So today we're going to kind of start off with Rwandan origins and how those origins eventually led to the Rwandan genocide. So very first thing we're going to do is we're going to start off with some maps. So right here in this map, you can see that this is Central Africa in the late 1800s. So there's this thing called the Berlin Conference where the Europeans divide up Africa, and as you can see here, this is where Rwanda is. It was a part of German East Africa. So when the Germans showed up, they found some Belgians there, and in order to protect this colony without having to, spend a lot on troops, they actually allied with the local Tutsi tribe in the area. So before we continue, with the rest of the conversation, first we need to talk about who the Tutsi and Hutu are. So the Tutsi are the minority group within Rwanda. They have historically been the elite group and the rulers of the country, while the majority of the population have been the Hutu people. So that's around 80%, I'm pretty sure, today. So continuing in the next map, we're going to talk about how after World War I, the Germans lost control of East Africa due to their loss in the war. So Tanzania right here became part of the British Empire, and Rwanda and Burundi right here were added to Belgium. So they were actually added into their own kind of colony, separate from the Belgian Congo. But later on, they were united in legal code in 1926 with the rest of the Congo, and from then on, it really just secured the Tutsi hold, as the Belgians specifically directly worked with the Tutsi people. So now we're going to kind of fast forward into the 50s. So World War II has just happened, and now you're kind of having decolonization going on throughout Africa. So in 1956, the Belgian government decided that there should start being elections. And they did this because they're like, hey, Rwanda needs to start having elections, see that their government can run well, and then we'll let them have independence. So as soon as these elections began, you started to see ethnic tensions throughout the entirety of the country. And especially when the election happened, you basically had a lot of Hutu get elected, which started to kind of threaten the Tutsi base. And you also got to realize, in this election, it wasn't like the upper echelons of Rwandan society were the ones that were being elected. It was kind of the lower people, like governors and mayors. The upper echelons of society were still handpicked by the new kind of conglomerated Tutsi monarchy. And so everything else was Hutu, and it was just lower ranking. So if you were a Hutu, you basically looked at your society and were like, oh my god, it's a caste system. Well, like a ethnic caste system where the lower echelons of society are Hutu and the upper parts are Tutsi. So, as this was going on, a few years later in 1959, the Rwandan king was murdered. And, well, he actually wasn't murdered. He had a hemorrhage, but they thought that he was murdered. Or the Tutsi elites. So the Tutsi elites blamed the Catholics in the country as well as the Belgians, because they thought that as the Belgians and the Catholic Church had become very sympathetic towards the Hutu, that they were trying to help the Hutu take over power. So they created a political party called the UNAR, where basically they had Rwandan nationalism, they were anti-church, anti-Westerner, and then the Hutus in response created the Parma Hutu party, which was, against them. So what you start having is in 1959, later in the year after the king dies, is you have a major incident that sparks what's called the Rwandan Revolution. So a Hutu sub-chief was actually murdered by a UNAR, the Tutsi-led party, by some UNAR youth. And this sparked, ethnic violence throughout the whole country as the Hutu start, committing violence against the Tutsi, and the Tutsi in retaliation to the Hutu. So the Belgian government in the beginning didn't really do anything about it. They just kind of sat there and were like, we're not really going to deal with it. Well, what happened was eventually the ethnic violence became so crazy, they sent this guy named, literally Guy Logius, to the Congo to restore order. He was a colonel in the Congo. And when he went there, he was very sympathetic towards the Hutu and actually allied with the Hutu, so like the Parma Hutu party, to restore order. So they restore order, and then in 1960, they have new elections, and the Parma-Hutu party gains the vast majority of the seats. And their independence was on the 1st of July 1962. So now we're going to go on kind of a side tangent. So after the revolution, there had a mass exodus of Tutsis. So they were worried that now the country was Hutu dominated, that the Hutus would start enacting revenge for the possible many years of Tutsi rule, and to have ethnic violence against them. So it said around 336,000 Tutsi fled as refugees to the neighboring countries. And I'm going to show you those countries right here so that we know where they are. So this is after independence. This is Rwanda right here. The capital is Kigali. South of it is Burundi. You have Tanzania right here. This is the Congo, which will become very important in the future. And this is Uganda, which is especially important. So actually, most of the Tutsis who fled actually went to Uganda because it's, right next to the border, and it's perceived as pretty safe. So, they go into those areas and they start kind of organizing. Now we're kind of going to go back to Rwanda. So, in Rwanda, after the Parma-Hutu came into power and many Tutsis fled, what you start having is the Hutu themselves starting to have infighting between the north and the south. And eventually it gets so bad, and there's so many political tensions that after the first president of Rwanda actually started to say some bad things about the military revolted and couped the government. And that was in 1973, and it was led by General Juvenal Habyarimana, and I have a picture of him right here. This is what he looked like. So Habyarimana was a general, and what he did is he installed a one-party state under the guise of the National Revolutionary Movement for Development, the MRND, and he led Rwanda as a one-party state where he was the only person on the ballots. He suspended the Constitution and the National Assembly. So he did this in order to, create a more powerful Rwanda in his mind, to stop the Hutu, infighting. But what it really did was it just caused even more political tensions and instability within Rwanda. So we're going to also go back to the Tutsi exiles. So this is what I call the Ugandan prequel. So in Uganda, there was tons of Tutsi exiles, right? And what happened was the Ugandan government started to be like, we're kind of done with all these refugees here. And they started, spreading xenophobia as part of propaganda. And so what the Tutsis in exile did is they formed something called the RPF. So that's the Rwandan Patriotic Front in 1979. So it was it was created to basically protect Rwandans against, Tutsi Rwandans within Uganda from the Ugandan government. And what happened is that during the Ugandan Bush War, where, Ugandan rebels tried to overthrow President Milton Obote, the RPF actually joined with them and helped overthrow that government. And after that they overthrew the government, something terrible happens, because they just overthrew the Ugandan government that didn't like them, but now the new Ugandan government didn't even really like them either, because many Ugandans were like, hey, after the RPF, helped win the war, obviously they were put in kind of positions of power within the military and the administration. So many Ugandans were like, yo, why y'all there? This is supposed to be Uganda. We don't want a bunch of Rwandans here. So you started to get, the populace of Uganda started to turn against the, RPF, and then you started to have the government. So this started to convince RPF leaders for a possible return to Rwanda via invasion. And, the hate in Uganda, coupled with the instability in Rwanda under Habyarimana, they basically were like, this is a good time, and they started planning in the late 1980s. And they saw to it that they were ready around 1990. So on the 1st of October 1990, around 50 RPF members who were in Uganda actually crossed the border into Rwanda, and they killed a Rwandan customs guard in the north. They were soon followed around 2,500 RPF soldiers that were in the Ugandan military, plus around 800 civilians. Now, at the time, the president of Rwanda and Uganda were actually both in New York at the World Summit for Children. And, Rwanda was pretty powerful. They had around 5,200 troops, and they had more advanced weapons that they bought from the French. but they were pretty nervous about this new invasion. So what they do is they actually call in the French to come help them. And the French kind of overcompensate because they sent around 600 troops, which was double what they promised that they would send. Zaire also sent some, which is the modern DRC, but the Rwandans had some issues with their soldiers, to say the least. But really, the most important thing to say here is that the leader of the RPF died the second day of the invasion. His name was Rwigema. I really hope I said that right. And he was shot the literal second day, and it's kind of disputed. He could have been shot by a stray bullet. Some people think he was shot by another RPF guy who they might have had a disagreement with. But what's more important is that he's dead, and this destroys the morale of the RPF. So, the French troops and the Rwandan troops absolutely, crush the RPF, and they have to flee back into Uganda. And this is where we get to one of the most important people in Rwandan history, and his name is Kagame. And here we go. This is Paul Kagame. So Kagame was actually in the United States at the time at Fort Leavenworth, where he was kind of in a military training course. And he was really good friends with Rwigema, who was, the leader of the RPF. And when he heard that the guy died, he instantly went back to Uganda, because that's where the RPF is, and he, went back and he tried to reorganize the army. So when he gets there, he sees the army's basically in shambles. They start to hide in something called the Virunga Mountains, and they basically have a mini where George Washington stayed in the valley. I can't remember what it's called for some reason. But anyway, so what he does is he kind of reforms the military, and he kind of turns them more into a guerrilla group, and he kind of standardizes the military stuff that they have, and he creates them to be a better fighting force. So after around 3 months, Kagame actually decides to fight again in 1991, and what they do is they target a powerful stronghold within Rwanda that was very much linked to the president, and they actually took it and freed a bunch of political prisoners that were, in the actual biggest prison in Rwanda at the time. So now what we have is you have the RPF now in Rwanda again, and now we're going to go to this next slide where you can see this. So the RPF are in blue, the Rwanda government green, and then the demilitarized zone we'll talk about in a bit. So they invade, they have some territory, but neither side can actually beat each other. They're both getting victories and defeats. Neither side is really doing well, even though the Rwandans have French help. So after around 2 years of fighting, because you go from 1990 to 1992, the president of Rwanda actually says, hey, let's do a peace deal. No matter what, the president, the general wants to stay in power, right? He doesn't really want to lose anything. So they have a peace talk in Tanzania where he shows up, the MRND shows up, his political party with many Hutu extremists, and the RPF show up. So they're all kind of talking, but they all want different things. The RPF kind of want, the Tutsis to be returned, to be, legal protections against them. They also want power sharing. The president obviously just wants to stay in power, and then you have the MRND, who are actually the, many of them are, far right extremist Hutus, and they don't want any compromise. So because there's really no compromise, what they do is many of the extremist MRND members actually get their people to start, committing violence against Tutsis in the north to try to, poke at the RPF. Well, the RPF responded with an invasion. So about 6 months after the ceasefire, the RPF re-invade, and as you can see in the gray there, that's actually how far they get. And it freaks out the Rwandan government because, they absolutely smashed the Rwandan forces, and they were only kind of stalled when French troops came to help. So, what the RPF do is they then actually stop their invasion, and they do something called the Arusha Accords. So, the Arusha Accords are pretty interesting because the RPF invasion was actually more of a bargaining chip than a want to take over the nation, because they're like, hey, we just defeated your army, now you have to, do what we say. So, obviously, the biggest thing that it had to do was that the RPF had to withdraw from what they took, But it also said the Rwandan government couldn't move troops into the area where they, did conquer. So that's how you get the DMZ, or the demilitarized zone, in gray on the map. And this basically recognized that the RPF do own a section of Rwanda at this time. And there was also some other stuff about it, but the most important thing to know about is that during this time, what the Hutu extremists do is they start planning the final solution of killing all the Tutsis, basically, within Rwanda. Because they're like, hey, we need to get ready for, destroying the RPF and retaking our country back from these Tutsi invaders. So, now we get to the final topic of the genocide. So, on the 6th of April 1994, the president's plane was shot down, which was possibly by Hutu extremists who wanted to cause the final solution to happen sooner. What's interesting is it actually killed the Burundian president as well, in the country to the south. So, actually, within a few hours, the Rwandan genocide began. The interim government began ordering massive numbers of around 500,000 to 1 million Tutsi to die, and many moderate Hutu were included in this. So this is going to be the end of this video. The next video we're going to keep talking about the genocide as well as the aftermath, which will lead to the two Congo wars. I'm going to hope to get the full Kivu conflict in, but if not, then there will be a third video. But thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you guys have a great day. Thank you.